Welcome to the Advanced Freelancing Podcast. Every week, you'll hear strategies for building your online service-based business your way. And now, here's your host, veteran freelancer, author, and TEDx speaker, Laura Briggs.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Advanced Freelancing Podcast. Marketing is one of the most important things you're going to do all the time as a freelancer, even though over time it will get easier to do your marketing and you'll spend less and less of your time doing it if you're building your business the right way. But one thread always stays the same, and that is your ability to tell your story in a way that connects to your potential clients. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So I'm so excited to have a guest today to help break down this topic. My guest today is Amy Collins. So welcome to the show, Amy. Why don't you tell us a little bit about you and who you are?
Thank you so much for having me, Laura. So I write primarily emails for my clients, fun, personality-driven emails and assets, and also about stories. Help my clients tell the best story about themselves for their clients, courses, businesses, whatever they're doing. And I've been doing this for a little over a decade, and I've pivoted in so many different directions. And this is the direction that feels really good to me right now. So this is where I am.
I love that. I think it's a good lesson in the fact that you'll never hit that perfect point in your business where you figured out all the things and what you want to offer and how you're going to price it and have that last forever. This is a process that changes, and pivoting is completely normal. So talk to me a little bit about how you discovered the importance of telling a good business story as a freelancer.
Absolutely. And I started out with saying all that part about pivoting, because I think there's such an important part about telling our story, which comes down to owning our story and owning our experience and the skills that we actually have. I think so often we as freelancers get caught up in this spiral of what we don't have, the skills we don't have, the experience we don't have. And I think women especially suffer from this. And we end up discounting the things that we do have working for us. And I think that's where story comes in. And it starts with the story we tell ourselves in our head. And that gets portrayed to the story we tell our clients or our prospects, rather. So when we tell, a story that explains exactly what we do for clients and what we're doing right now, we're going to make a stronger impression and a stronger connection. So it's important that we're not holding ourselves back in that way.
Yeah. Can you give us a little bit of an example about a good business story? What does that really look like?
Sure. So let's say we're talking about a website, right? That's a good place to start. We all eventually have a website for our freelancing business, and we have an about page. And a good about page, actually, it talks to your prospects, right? Like you want a strong headline that says exactly what you do. And the majority of the about page should be about what you do for people. And then that leads into why you do it. And you can even touch on how you do it. At the end of the day, all human beings are selfish creatures, right? We all want to know, what are we getting out of this? And when a prospect's looking at you to potentially hire you for a job, they're hiring a person. They're not hiring your skill set, right? They're not just hiring your deliverable. So it's important to come across pretty upfront with, this is what I can do for you. This is what I do for my people. And then, always pepper in with some personality, of course. That's your own personality, maybe some personal tidbits that kind of feels a little bit like a meet and greet at a networking, right? But you're doing it online. And that can be translated, of course, into social media, wherever you are marketing yourself.
I think that's so important, because one of the biggest mistakes that I see new freelancers make is just wanting to prove that they're good at the skill because they're new to it. They're really kind of feeling untested. There may be some imposter syndrome going on. But the truth is that a client can't really differentiate you from any of your competitors. And so even if you can make the case that they need the service you're offering, it has to be about more than that you have the technical skills to deliver that that project. And I think a lot of people miss out on that story opportunity. So if you're new, how do you figure out what your story is that will resonate with clients?
Right. That's like the golden question, right? How do we find out what's really interesting about us? I think we as individuals, and generally speaking, tend to downplay our accomplishments, right? And downplay that our lives are interesting and that we have accomplished things. And so it can be helpful to find an outside, source to kind of help you do that. And that might be in a business coach, or if you're just starting out and you don't have money to invest in that, a friend, someone who's known you a long time, who really respects and admires you, who can say like, hey, you know what you're really good at? Like, you're really good at starting conversations with people, or you're really funny, and these are things that you want to incorporate into your story, because this is who you are and this is what makes you engaging. And that's what's going to bring prospects in. Like, yes, you also want to make the deliverable, but when you're first starting out and you're building these skill sets, I'm a huge proponent of learning on the job, right? Like, get paid to learn how to do the thing. Because if you're smart enough to already be, in the freelancing world to take that step, then you're smart enough to figure things out as you go. So that's where it's important to come across as like, hey, I'm a person who believes I can do this. And I want you to believe that, not in an iconic way, but just like, here are my best assets. Here's who I am. And then we can talk about the skill sets and deliverables second of all.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think the other place where you can kind of go wrong with telling your story is by keeping it too focused on yourself. Sure, it's probably a good motivation that you started offering freelance services because you hated your day job, or you felt like it wasn't going anywhere, or you were frustrated with that environment. That doesn't necessarily connect with other clients though. So think about ways that you may be able to tell some aspects of that story in a new way. Maybe you realized that you had a passion for a particular industry and wanted to be able to choose which projects you worked on. That's another way to kind of tell that story with making it a little bit more focused on the client. And then you can also talk about some of the outcomes that you deliver as a freelancer and why that makes a difference for the client and their bottom line. And I love what you said about being human, because it is often those moments where our clients connect with us the most. It's those little things that maybe you didn't realize were going to connect with someone. So I know one of the things that you talk about is how important it is to believe that your stories want to be heard. Can you dive a little bit into what that means?
Yeah, this is a hard one, right? This is because this is basically mindset work, for lack of a better word. But how do we get to that place where we believe our stories are interesting? And I'm a strong believer that everyone has a story, and that every story is interesting if you tell it the right way. And so these are two different skill sets, right? One is crafting and knowing which details to include. Like you just pointed out, like, you probably don't want to open with like, I got fired from my job, or I hated my job, so I started freelancing. And I'm going to dip back. I like that you said that. So I'm just going to, note that. And I also come from a background of sales, and rule number one in sales is, business is always good, right? Because people don't want to buy from losers, for the lack of a better word. You never want to complain that you can't pay rent, because just psychologically, it turns people off. So you always want to be positive, lead with the positive, lead with the can do. I think as far as like believing in your stories, it really comes down to just knowing that you have value as a human, and you have your story, your history, your experiences. Even if you're 22 years old and you've just graduated from college and this is the path you want to do, and you feel like you haven't had that many experiences, you have, and you can just own what you have and work with that. And again, this is a case where a lot of us need a little bit of outside help to identify what those stories are, because so many of us, I talk to so many people who just don't think their lives are interesting. And here's a tip, like, what's interesting to you, start there, because whatever you're interested in, there's probably going to be someone else who's also interested in that. Also, I believe interesting people are interested people. So that's
Yeah.
where I would
Yeah.
start is what turns you on, right?
hmm hmm And how do you walk that line between sharing something that is interesting and maybe going too far with it and making it maybe either too personal or too focused on yourself? How do you kind of mine for some of those gems that strike that sweet spot?
Yeah, it's just a constant checking back in. Like, am I still speaking to my prospect, or am I now kind of doing my one woman show? Right. Um, I think, you want to use you even in your
Mhm.
about page. Again, we're talking about website as an example.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, you're talking to your prospect. You're having a conversation with them. It's not just a monologue. So I think just checking back and asking that question, does this feel like monologue or does this feel like a beginning of a conversation?
hmm So it goes on the about page of your website, but I imagine that this story is going to show up in many different ways throughout your business. So, what are some of the ways that you can repurpose this story and make sure that it's consistent across all of your marketing? Where else does it go, essentially?
Sure. It goes wherever you're marketing yourself. So if you're on LinkedIn, your story goes there. If you're on Instagram, your story goes there. If you're on Instagram, you've probably seen a lot of service providers periodically reintroduce themselves when they have new followers. So maybe
Mhm.
that's where your story goes. You might tweak it. You might substitute a new, kind of similar experience, but it gets the same point across. This is
Mhm.
the story you tell when you're on a podcast, right? Or meeting someone for the first time who's just like, what do you do? Depending on, what kind of freelancing you do. I know copywriters like myself, we often end up in the conversation of like, oh, so you copyright things? Like, what does that mean to copyright? And so that's like a
Mhm.
perfect way to kind of have fun with your story and craft it in a way that people kind of get it or at least aren't confused.
Mhm. And how do we know? I mean, I imagine that if you're working with clients and you have some background as a freelancer already, you're not necessarily starting from scratch, right? So you've probably gotten some clues from clients about what resonated with your story with them. Is there a way to kind of ask that or discover those details without maybe coming right out and saying, hey, I'm trying to figure out how to repurpose this into my marketing for future clients? But how do you kind of get that detail?
Absolutely. Well, I'm also a huge fan of being very direct and asking for testimonials when you finish projects, right? And you can pull a lot from there. But I think
Mhm.
just being a really good listener and being open to hearing compliments about yourself so that when you hear
Mhm.
your clients say, like, oh, I love it when you do this, or I love this, or this was really great, that's gold, and that's for you to own and put that little pendant on your vest, right? um
Mhm.
and if you pay close attention, you'll probably hear the same things that you do well over and over again from different clients.
hmm Yeah, I agree with that. And the things that you hear from clients might surprise you a little bit. It might be things that you thought were a given, like delivering on time, or the fact that you ran meetings very well, or you really captured their voice, or things like that. You might assume, especially if you're a writer, well, yeah, that's part of my job. It's my job to hear things and then kind of synthesize it and then make sure that it's put out in a written product that sounds like it came from your company or a thought leader at your company. But that may be something that was a concern for your client coming into the project. Maybe they talked to other copywriters and they didn't get that sense, or they've had a bad experience with other copywriters. So listen to those things so that you can kind of hit home on what is most important to your prospective clients. So, how has story really featured into your ability to grow your freelance business?
Oh, I think story is probably a huge cornerstone of my business. I have a newsletter that I write every week that are just stories. They're mostly personal essays and they have a lot of philosophical mindset kind of stuff to them. Sometimes it's business stuff. I have built quite an audience doing that, which is something I really just started doing because I love it, less about marketing. But I think that really has informed the way I talk about my business and talk about what I'm doing and
Mhm.
connecting with other people because I am very real and I am very like I started out right at the beginning of this podcast saying I've pivoted 100,000 times and I'm okay with that. And it took me a long time to be okay with that. There certainly was a time where the story in my head was, I can't figure out what I want to do, but that's not the only story.
Yeah, I can see where I think sometimes we don't realize how the story we're telling ourselves internally is being projected in our marketing. Because when you were talking, for example, about pivoting and not really being sure what you wanted to commit to, we may not realize it, but that could potentially be showing up in how we market ourselves to clients. Maybe we're concerned that that's going to be a problem, either consciously or subconsciously, and that can kind of show up as maybe how you didn't intend for it to show up to clients. And I think you can honestly use those kinds of things to your advantage. You pivot into projects and areas of industry and niches that are very interesting to you. And you've developed a very dynamic work profile, providing all these different kinds of copy and strategic components to a number of companies. And so even something you may be thinking about, wow, this company might think that I hop around all the time and I can't make up my mind about what I want to do, that can really be used to position yourself as an actual benefit, right? If you're working with a company that has a broad range of customers, well, you've worked with many different types of companies. You've had to adapt to their different brand voice in all those situations. So it can actually be a benefit to you as well. And I love that you're just talking about all of the different ways that story shows up, because it shows up in the forward placing positions on our website, on our LinkedIn profile, in the way that we communicate with clients before we work together. But that story thread also continues as you are working with your clients too. It's really something where, if you've promised them great communication, it should be seamless that shows up in your interactions in working with them. And because that comes naturally to you, you attract more clients who are looking for a great communicator, and you get more testimonials saying that you are a great communicator. And it's kind of this snowball effect that really starts to build on itself. So I think especially newbies, they struggle with this idea of story, but even experienced freelancers, I've been doing this 10 years, looking back and going, well, how do I consolidate all the different things I've done into a paragraph or into an elevator speech and have it like, how do I cherry pick which elements of this make the most sense for my prospective client to hear at this particular moment? And I think that in and of itself is something to consider. Do you kind of have different pitches or different things you lean into if it's a different style of client or if it's a different type of project, for example?
Absolutely. And I was just thinking of that because you were talking about something you just said made me think this. A story it can be a conversation starter, right? It's, what you're talking about, like distilling your 10 years of experience onto one page. Like a resume is never going to reflect who you are or what you can do or what value you can provide to a company. I mean, we're generally not talking about resumes when we're freelancing, but just sometimes a LinkedIn profile can feel like a resume, right? So I think that story it's just a conversation starter. And then you see where that goes. So say you jump on a discovery call with a prospect, and whatever part of your website or your LinkedIn profile or your story they picked up on, they're going to tell you what's interesting. And then you just let the conversation flow, right? A good discovery call, a good sales call should just be a conversation. It's not like we're trying to sell ourselves. We're not pricing ourselves, right? We're not putting a value on us as a human. And I think a lot of us get caught up in, I got to make the sale. I got to close the deal. And then we end up slashing our price at the end because we just want a yes. But when we approach it as a conversation, then you have an opportunity for true connection. And you get to a place where both you and the prospect feel good about working together, or don't, or right away, like, this is not going to work. Our personalities aren't going to vibe, etc. I just think it makes for such a much better working experience, and it's a better way to live.
Yeah, absolutely. And you may start to learn things that resonate with people, but kind of cover a broad basis in a way that introduces what your personality is all about. It is okay to be the person who has a really sarcastic, dry sense of humor, and maybe that appeals to a certain set of clients. Or I often lean into the fact that I'm pretty serious and organized, and most of my clients are lawyers. So that's something that appeals to their specific nature. So you're not really going to get it wrong, but using the details that you know about yourself, that other people have told you about you, that past clients have given you feedback on, you can start to weave together this story of how you show up for your clients. And I mean, when your clients are hiring someone, the base level they expect is that you know how to do the task. So yes, that's important, but it's so much less important than you think. Once they have a level of confidence in your ability to deliver the deliverable, the primary concern they have shifts to something else of who is the best person for me to work with on this particular project. So now you have some tips and ideas in mind about how you can start to weave your story into this process of building your business and making more authentic connections with clients. So Amy, can you tell us where listeners can go to learn a little bit more about you?
Yes, you can go to my website, therealamycollins.com. And from there, you can jump on my newsletter, Rude But Charming, if you like. I'm also working on launching a storytelling course, which is mainly geared towards telling great stories in emails for your list, or to also help your clients. There's a whole chapter about working with clients to get their stories. Also on Instagram at The Real Amy Collins and on LinkedIn.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing your expertise today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been great, Laura.